valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And it also mentions how he prepares the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. And it mentions that he anoints my head with oil and my cup runs over. Um, well, part of being driven by the Spirit of God and part of fulfilling the purpose of God is there's going to be times where you are going to be beside still waters, where you're sustained. Everything's all right. Everything's fine. There's going to be time where you're by green pastures and, provision is there for you to get you through to the next day. There's going to be times where he's leading you down paths of righteousness. But sometimes the paths of righteousness will lead you into the valley. Sometimes as you're following God, it's going to lead you to the valley of the shadow of death. There's times where it'll lead you to a point where your cup is running over, where God is going to anoint you in the presence of your enemies. But sometimes that doesn't come until after the valley. A lot of times we want to go straight from green pastures and paths of righteousness straight to thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over in the presence of my enemies. Once again, I'm paraphrasing. A lot of times we want that elevation, that exaltation, especially in front of, our friends, but in front of my enemy, you're going to exalt me and lift me up and anoint my head with oil. But do you have the right character for God to be able to do that? And the glory of God is going to go to him and not to you. That's why a lot of times some of us are stuck in the valley because we can't allow ourselves to be humbled, or we don't know how to lean on God when we're going through these situations. And one thing that really does feel like a valley, at least in a natural sense, because when it's talking about this, there's times, and really you're looking at a shepherd and a sheep, hence the green pastures, still waters. I mean, I need more than just green pastures to naturally survive. So he's using the analogy of a shepherd leading a sheep. There's times where he's leading them through here, leading them through there. Now, for us, we don't have to actually deal with actual green pastures. Any farmers here? Anyone tend to sheep? No. So how do we apply it to our life? Well, there are going to be times where there's sustenance. There's going to be times where there's provision. But there's also going to be times where we're in the valley of shadow of death where we may be dealing with isolation. We may be dealing with dangerous things. Maybe not naturally. Some people it is actually naturally, especially if they're in dangerous countries. But for us, we have a lot of provision. A lot is provided for us. Even some of the poorest Americans are richer than the majority of the world. So we have a lot of provision for us. So what would be a valley for us? Well, it could be times of insecurity. It could be times of doubt, times of depression. There's a lot of things that we could go through that may not just be natural, that are spiritual as well, that are a valley for us. And we have to go through those valleys with the right attitude, with the right character, and we have to let God shape us in these moments. And a lot of times these moments are what draw us closer to God, what drive us toward God. But the point I wanted to make is that what would be a valley that we might have to go through today? I know I mentioned some of them, but just while we're here, what do you think would be a valley for a Christian or a child of God? I know for me, one thing could be maybe scriptures I don't quite understand. Because there's times where there's challenging scriptures that I'm reading, and I'm like, Lord, I know you're good because scripture says you're good, but why are you saying this, this, and this? And my brain didn't understand it, and it could be a challenge for me. Anyone out there, what do you think are some challenges in a Christian's walk with God? Yes, and I'm coming to you next, sis. A delayed response to our prayer, absolutely. Because the Lord could answer with a yes, a no, or a not right now. And if it's not yes, we think the Lord has abandoned us and forsaken us. Yes, sis, you had your hand raised. What would you say is a challenge for a Christian sometimes, or could be a valley that we might deal with? Faith. Yeah, absolutely. Faith can be a challenge because a lot of times your faith is telling you to do things that your flesh and everything around you is telling you the opposite. Absolutely. One could be a church hurt. Someone has wronged you. Someone has hurt you. I'll get you in just a moment, sis. Yes, ma'am. Church hurt. Somebody that you esteemed highly, especially if you first got saved, and, somebody that was nice to you and kind to you lashes out or is mean or that can cripple you. You shouldn't let it, but it can. It has the potential to. Yes, ma'am. Trust. Yeah. That can be a struggle, being able to trust. Yeah, absolutely. Submission, that can be a struggle for some people. But here we're focusing on rejection. In this lesson today, we're focusing on dealing with rejection. And I think as a Christian, that's something we have to overcome. And we have to grow. We have to mature to where we can handle rejection. And it's difficult. It's tough because as human beings, even if you're an introvert, as human beings, we need one another. Humans weren't built to be isolated. We weren't meant to be isolated. Why do you think that one of the worst punishments outside of death, when you're in prison, when you get in trouble, what do? Solitary confinement. That's the worst punishment while you're in prison. Obviously, death, that's the worst. I mean, solitary is better than death. But the point I wanted to make is that when they punish you, they may take away food, they may take away privileges, but if they really want to get their point across that you've done something wrong, what do? They isolate you. Why? Because that can be a scary place, a scary position. And human beings, we're not meant to be isolated. We're not meant to be alone. So rejection is a challenge for us. But we have to remember that everything we've gone through, well, Jesus went through. In fact, probably even worse. We know it's worse. I've never been beaten. I had some whoopings I deserved, but I've never been beaten with a cat of nine tails, nailed to a cross. Likely he was naked when that happened, so, that's shameful. Crown of thorns, all these things. And even now he's dealing with rejection, even before the cross, his own people. Wait, isn't this just the son of Joseph telling us now that these words are fulfilled in theirs? Come on, Jesus, get out of here. I changed your cloth diaper. I help. And I'm obviously adding in there. This is my own flair. This isn't scripture. But the point I'm making is that they didn't think too much of him. They didn't think, because he was just common to them. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. For those of you who couldn't hear, she said, during times of rejection, we must stay humble and we must keep our focus. We have to keep our focus on God, and that's extremely important. In fact, when you're dealing with the Sermon on the Mount, to kind of summarize it, and there's so much in the Sermon on the Mount, but in essence, it's telling you to focus on God, put your attention to Him, think on the kingdom, think on the things of God, and then focus on the day that you're dealing with. Focus on today. Don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow has its own evil. But really, it's letting us know the things of God, which are good things. Focus on those things. Put your mind on those. Don't get distracted. What does it mean to be good? Have good character, integrity, honesty, all these things. But focus on God. Keep your focus on Him, and then tackle the issues of today. And in doing so, it will help you. It will keep you, as she said, from getting distracted. We can't be distracted. We have to be focused. And when we're dealing with rejection, we have to have a spirit of humility as well, because pride can get us. How dare they reject me? Don't they know that think about it. If anyone should have been offended, it should have been Jesus. Look, you're rejecting me, but I know the numbers of hair on your head. At least in His, divinity, we know that. You rejected me, but I made you. I formed you. This is God of all creation manifest in flesh, and they're rejecting Him. Now, that should teach us a lesson, a few different lessons, but one lesson that comes to mind is that if they rejected Him, who is you?